Well, greetings, everyone. I see that we have a number of people who have already joined us. My name is Bill Guyton, and I'm the Executive Director of the Fine Chocolate Industry Association, or FCIA. I see a lot of familiar names in the participant list, and we're really glad to welcome all of you, and also those who may be joining us for the first time. As you all know, FCIA is a trade association representing now about 350 members. So actually, we've grown oversized during the pandemic, which is rather unusual, but I think shows the importance of this segment of the chocolate industry, and hopefully how it's going to grow over time. And that fits nicely in with the topic that we're going to be covering today. It's really the future of craft chocolate, and we're really delighted to have Matt Caputo with us today, who's well placed to really give some insights on what he's seeing happening in the market from his vantage point. But before I turn it over to Matt, I just wanted to mention a few things. First of all, we have a really interesting webinar tomorrow. Usually we have webinars every Thursday, and this week we have two. We have the one today, and then the one tomorrow is going to be looking at the results from a business survey that was conducted by Oregon State University and the University of Washington on FCIA members to see what changes have happened over the last 2 years since they last did the survey. They asked questions about our members regarding the number of employees, gross revenues, sourcing practices, et cetera. So this will also really complement the discussion today to give some hard evidence to what's happening with companies, what's happening with our membership through the pandemic. So we hope you can join for that. Again, it's at 12 noon tomorrow, or 9 a.m. Pacific time for those on the West Coast of the US. The following week, we also have an interesting webinar a week from today, and it's looking at the results from a consumer survey that was done with FCIA and the National Confectioners Association and Barry Callebaut, looking at the perceptions of chocolate consumers in the United States. It's a nationwide survey looking at mass market chocolate consumers, premium chocolate consumers, and fine chocolate consumers, just to see how their perceptions on single origin, on different inclusions has changed or stayed the same over time. All of the data is disaggregated by gender, by age, and by geography. So for those of you really interested to know the pulse of the consumer market, that this might be an interesting conversation to hear. So we hope you can join for that. But with that, I'd like to first introduce again Effie Maglares from FCIA, who's going to be taking on the role of executive director starting January 1st. And so Effie, we're really pleased about that. You'll be a great leader, and thanks for all that you do on organizing these events. Wonderful. Matt, thank you for being with us today, and you're so well placed to really have as I mentioned, the pulse on the fine chocolate market. And we have over 100 people who registered for this, and we have over 40 on the line today, and more are joining. So we look forward to hearing your remarks. And for those participants, if you could ask any questions you have in the Q&A, and we'll make sure to leave plenty of time at the end to answer your questions. So with that, Matt, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thanks for the warm welcome, Bill, and hello to everybody. I was looking through the names. I see a lot of familiar names, so it's good to be on the Zoom with y'all. I hope what that study that you're talking about complements what I'm saying. I mean, it could completely contradict it. So I always tell people to take what I say with a grain of salt. I'm just one business, but we do work with over 60 different chocolate makers, and a lot of them are very successful and are growing, some of them exponentially. So we have a good vantage point. But I want to start out with a little anecdote about a meeting that I was in not too long ago, where I was there to sell a professional chocolate buyer responsible for, let's just say, buying chocolate for well over 100 stores. And I was in this meeting, and I start pulling out my chocolate bars, and the person says to me, "Oh God, not another single origin dark chocolate tasting." And my heart just sunk, because when I started this business of wholesale distribution for chocolate, I was a cheesemonger, and I started it because I was obsessed with chocolate. Single origin bean to bar chocolate was by far the most culinarily exciting thing I'd ever come across. And I was a big time cheese geek, really into wine, like, and chocolate was so exciting to me. I taught classes. I just exuded excitement about this category, and it was quite infectious. In fact, again, that's kind of why I started the wholesale end, is because I was like, man, I'm so good at creating a crew of people and me myself convincing consumers to be excited about this category. And I thought to myself, like, hey, instead of just focusing on people that are buying for their own home, could we also entice people that are making larger buying decisions for their store or their, chain of grocery stores? And so we decided to try our hand at being a chocolate distributor, addressing the needs of the artisans that the other distributors weren't able to do. And we became really successful at it. It was really easy. Like, honestly, it felt like shooting fish in a barrel. I would get a meeting with one of these buyers, and that was the hardest part. I mean, I would get in front of them. I would tell them stories about the beans. This was, 15 years ago. Tell them stories about the beans. They'd be trying origins of cacao that were unlike anything that they'd ever tried before. Anytime I sat down to do one of these tastings, it was pretty much guaranteed that they had never tasted one of these types of chocolates before, or that they had never heard this specific story about this specific origin. And it was all just like very romantic, almost mysticism surrounding it. And nowadays, when I bring out a single origin from place X, Y, or Z, these same buyers, they've already tried 30 different chocolates from those exact same beans. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that the industry has changed, and where inspiration has to come from is changing along with that. So today I'm here to talk about what I see from my vantage point, working with 60 different chocolate makers, and as what is now the biggest chocolate distributor in the United States, A Priori Specialty Foods. What we're seeing is working and how we're seeing the industry adapt. So like I mentioned, there is fatigue with single origin dark chocolate. That doesn't mean that it's not important. In fact, very luckily, it is still one of those kind of gatekeeper things. Like, all these buyers that are doing this, making the decisions on these chocolates, for the most part, they get it, and they want to have, they're into the single origin thing, and they understand the importance of terroir and where it comes from. And so as a chocolate makers go, you almost really have to have some of those good single origin bars in your lineup. That being said, like we talked about earlier, they don't need another option for this origin or that origin. They already have 10 of them on their shelves. So what they need from these brands that they're looking at adding to their shelves, they need something that is a differentiator. And unfortunately, origin almost can never be that these days. So what are we seeing in terms of differentiators that are really resonating? We are seeing brands that have a sense of place, and allow the consumer to travel through taste, or almost feel like they're participating in more than just something delicious. There's brands out there that can make you feel like it's almost a cultural experience when you're eating their chocolate. One that comes to mind for having a cultural experience when you taste chocolate. Think about how evocative Cuna de Piedra is, a brand from Mexican, all Mexican cacao, inclusions that talk about, slow food protected Mexican ingredients, instead of infusing with whiskey, with mezcal. And so things that are really showcase the culinary and the culture of a specific place, in that case, Mexico. And people really are, that's really resonating with the American craft chocolate consumer right now, whether it's in the grocery store or at the specialty stores. This is something that's really important. And this was happening, this isn't just because everyone's been on lockdown in the pandemic and yearning to travel and being, starved for travel. This was a trend that we were seeing well before the pandemic, but only got amplified by the pandemic. So I gave that one example with a sense of place in terms of almost like a cultural experience. Another one that can be with specific ingredients that I always like to talk about is a company called Chocolate Naive. Chocolate Naive is a wonderful artisan producer out of Lithuania. And I love the case study of their brand because they have a few different distinct lines. But for most of their history, they had two distinct lines. One that is based on ingredients and flavors from Lithuanian forest or agriculture. And anyone who's been to Lithuania or that area of the world will know there's just an abundance of beautiful forest and, the fruits of the forest, your berries, your mushrooms, their honeys, and just agriculture that speaks to, days gone by, done really beautifully. And then he had this other line with flavors of the equator, inspired by ingredients that grow around the cacao that he sources. And so on the one hand, you had this line with flavors of Lithuania, with Lithuanian porcini mushrooms that he would go out and harvest himself. You would have bee bread and honey from one of his friends that's like a local beekeeper. He does one with kefir or like Lithuanian dark beers. So he had all these Lithuanian flavors in the one line, and on the other line he had all these tropical flavors. And in terms of quality, he put no difference in effort between both of those lines. He put an incredible amount of inspiration went into each one, and the bars from each line are fantastically artistic to me. Now, a lot of people don't like his style, but those that love it know that he does something unique. So he's putting this equal effort into both of these lines, but the one that was continuously getting traction is the forager line, the one with the Lithuanian flavors, the one that was telling the place of where the chocolate itself was being made. Sure, the other one was successful too, but the outliers were traditionally these ones that were about the Lithuanian flavors. So that's a good example of a brand that has a sense of place based on the ingredients that they're putting into it. But there's also examples of brands like Omnom that, they have Omnom's from Iceland, they produce in Reykjavik. And while they do use Icelandic ingredients, it's not necessarily in every bar, and it's not the most central message in their marketing. Sometimes a sense of place can go beyond something that is really easy to put your finger on. But for Omnom, it's more about the visuals and the messages in their branding. So if you look at their bars, they've got this art that's really evocative, that reminds us almost of its Viking past. And so there's lots of different ways that you can evoke a sense of place. Another couple examples of brands that I think are doing things really well with regards to evoking a sense of place in a unique way. One I like to talk about is Fosa from Singapore, because not only are they using Singaporean ingredients in their inclusion bars, but they are actually using Singaporean cuisine. They have a line of bars that are inspired by actual dishes. Like they have one, the spicy mala bar. Spicy mala is a Singaporean hot pot dish, and all the spices and seasonings that you'd usually have into that, that go into that, including like the Szechuan pepper that makes your lips and tongue tingle. It's in there. And you wouldn't think of something like that savory necessarily going with chocolate. Another great example is their salted egg cereal. They have a bar that is wildly popular, that has duck eggs. It has very savory seasonings. I think there's some seaweed in there. It's got some really unique spicing. They had one not too long ago with shrimp and bonito, but they're not just putting in weird ingredients. These are all things. Take the salted duck egg, for example. One of the most unique things about Singaporean food culture is, you know, they have food stalls, essentially food trucks. Imagine food trucks that were getting Michelin stars from the Michelin Guide, you know, not just, you know, a casual endeavor. You'll see food stalls there in Singapore where they've been focusing on not just an array of dishes like a restaurant, but one dish. That food stall might have been focusing on that one dish for generation after generation after generation, and perfecting that one thing. And so, yes, it might sound strange to have, you know, duck egg in a chocolate bar, but what Fossa is inspired by is the Singaporean food culture, and one of their favorite dishes at these food stalls is this salted duck egg cereal. And they were so inspired by it, they thought, like, gosh, how can we start infusing these really delicious Singaporean actually recipes into chocolate in a way that is appropriate, so that it's not just some weird thing, but it's this delicious experience rooted in craft chocolate. Another brand that's doing things like that is really well is Mirzam. They're weaving the tale of the Middle East's role in trading and the spice routes. It's almost like history is just woven perfectly with their chocolate bars, and it's inspiring. You feel like when you're eating these things that you're traveling, and it's a really wonderful thing. Not so, yes, all these brands that I mentioned have single origin dark chocolate bars in their lineup. But let me just tell you, with rare exception, are any of those single origin dark chocolate bars their best sellers. So it's almost like you need those. It needs to be based in craft chocolate. It needs to be based in cacao that is of very good provenance. It's not like any of these producers have, you know, oh, we use good cacao for our single origin, but in this other line, we use, you know, garbage or, you know, industrially produced cacao. No, it's important that it be based in that. But as we see things evolve, we're seeing that people want more. They already have, the consumer already has at every store they go to, you know, 10 options on the shelf for a 70%-ish Tanzania or whatever. They don't need any more options for that. There's plenty on the shelf already, and those will continue to sell. And I think quality will determine which ones sell in regard to that. Quality and branding, of course. We can talk about branding all day long, but those that are really separating themselves from the herd are those that have a sense of place. Now, I've given a lot of exotic examples, and sometimes I find that brands that produce here in America feel like they can't necessarily do that, but I would disagree. I think there's brands that are doing a very, very good job of having a sense of place that resonates not just locally and beyond their local area. And a brand that I'd give as an example for, there's a lot of them that I could give as examples for that, but Ritual is one that I like to give because it's from, you know, my hometown here, or home state of Utah. They're about a half hour away from me in Park City. I'm here in Salt Lake City. And they have, for the longest time, they just had single origin dark chocolate bars. They did a blend, but it was all just single origin dark chocolate bars. And they were really successful with those. And they still are. They have beautiful packaging, the molds, they're just the tempering, it's gorgeous. It's a beautiful experience. and the chocolate is wonderful. You know, they use longitudinal conch. It's just, they've got a beautiful factory that people tour. So they've got like this cult-like following. But when they launched these new inclusion lines, it's when it really took off. And of course, you know, they didn't just do, one I love to give an example of is their, I like to call it their Gianduja bar, but they don't call it that. You know, Gianduja, I'm sure everyone on the Zoom knows, is traditionally made with hazelnuts and milk chocolate. Interesting history on that. I love to teach. I teach classes on the history of chocolate, and there's a fascinating story behind Gianduja. But you know, it would be an inappropriate thing to do to tell the story of Utah, to have a sense of place for Utah. We don't have hazelnuts here. What we have are a lot of pine nuts. So instead of doing hazelnut Gianduja, they kind of did one with pine nuts that are abundant here in Utah, and it's got its own thing going on. They have, you know, they'll use a lavender infusion, and there's a local lavender farms not too far from their factory, and this is something that's very common in this mountainous area. They've done one of the ones I think that is encapsulates Utah culture in such a unique way, and is one of our best-selling bars that I believe that's over $14. I think it's over, I can't remember. Anyway, it's one of our best-selling expensive bars, is their après ski bar. And for those of you that don't know what après ski is there's basically this global culture with skiers and snowboarders for just doing, you know, skiing's fun and all, but we're really here to enjoy the company of others after. And so having a libation and tasty bites after skiing is a fantastic tradition. And, you know, you'll see a huge array of different outgrowths of that, depending on what type of ski resort you're going to. You know, some of them are more like tailgating style, where it's going to be Pabst Blue Ribbon and hamburgers on the back in the parking lot of the ski resort. Whereas some of them on the other end of the extreme are at the fancy world-class resorts like that we have abundantly here in Utah, like Deer Valley, where it would be more appropriate to have, you know, berries and champagne, and probably a cheese and charcuterie board and things like that. And so, okay, so Rituals Bar is $12. Thank you. Still over the $10 mark. It's one of our best sellers over the $10 mark. It's got raspberries and champagne, and is called the après ski bar, or the après bar. I think they could expand on that a lot. Anyway, I feel like maybe I'm beating a dead horse, and you guys kind of get that these companies that are telling the tale of their location, not the location of the cacao, which is really interesting. Some of them are successful telling the tale of the cacao, but with the ones that we're seeing break through is it's like, okay, the cacao is important, but how do we tell our story? How do we tell the story of our brand, and our brand, how it ties to a sense of place? So I'll leave you with that and move on to another phenomenon that we are seeing that is something that we've like to call beyond the bar. Yeah, you know, the grocery store, the cheese shops, at this point, we've arrived at critical mass for how many chocolate bars they're willing to put on their shelves. It was really fun to see when a priori starts working with a store, the amount of shelf space that they will allocate to craft chocolate over the course of a year will double. And that's been a fantastic thing to see. And we're seeing that the shelf space dedicated to the type of chocolate that uses great agriculture has grown over the last several years. And I think that will continue a little bit, but I think for the most part, we've reached critical mass with most stores. So when we look to what these buyers are hungry for, there's no denying that their ears perk up right away when we have a craft chocolate brand that also have things that are not chocolate bars. Great examples of that could be a gourmet chocolate bar. Mayana comes to mind. Ranger unfortunately just had to discontinue one that was becoming wildly popular because the process became unsustainable for them. But it was like essentially, it's called their Hazel Bar. It was essentially a gourmet Butterfinger enrobed with their local hazelnuts, enrobed with their own chocolate. Om Nom Crunch, if any of you've seen those, they've recently reinvented them. They're essentially gourmet Whoppers. They're dragées. They're just malt balls. But they now have, I think, 2 or 3 in the line that just released. But those have been extremely popular and helping Om Nom gain shelf space outside of what's regularly, given to craft chocolate in terms of bars. They're finding themselves in whole new areas of the stores or commanding more shelf space because of those. Other dragées that are breaking through, I love to give a shout out to another American brand that's doing something really cool with California almonds. And who better to do a dragées with California almonds than a California chocolate company? And Dick Taylor has in a little tube that's with all the class that you would expect from a company with branding like Dick Taylor's, beautifully executed chocolate covered almond dragées in a beautiful package, and they're performing really, really well. Now, is that opportunity to do almond dragées as attractive to someone in Tennessee or New York? Probably not going to be as much of a runaway success, because again, it helps Dick Taylor to tell their story, which is tied to a place and California is that place. Other great examples, wonderful companies like Fruition in New York, their bourbon caramels, they're basically bonbons that have a year shelf life. Huge success, beautifully executed, absolutely delicious. And it doesn't, when a buyer picks up an item like that, they don't have to, at this point, take out a chocolate bar. And that's what we're seeing is when a buyer does at this point pick up a new chocolate bar, unfortunately, we've reached the critical mass where usually they also have to take one out. There's just only so much shelf space that they can dedicate to it. Can we continue to grow that shelf space? Yes, I hope so. It takes a lot of education, and there's a lot of things in the industry, unfortunately, working against us growing that shelf space. Maybe we can talk about those in Q&A later if anyone's interested. Another example that is more of a recent success that I think is really promising is Mirzam. They have a little box that looks like it's for bonbons, but inside it's like chocolate enrobed dates that are stuffed with various different things. And there's a little tasting guide. And so you open it up, and I believe there's 9 little pieces, and each one is a chocolate stuffed date with a different recipe, and they're visually different, and they have different ingredients in each one. And they're all, of course, Middle Eastern appropriate ingredients and beautifully executed, year shelf life. And that is gaining them a lot of shelf space that is not normally allocated to dark chocolate bars. So we're starting to see that the consumer is wanting that good agriculture, that delicious chocolate, the values that they've bought into, and they want it in things other than dark chocolate. Don't get me wrong, they still want the dark chocolate, they still want the milk chocolate, even white chocolate. But these are the opportunities we're seeing for brands to really separate themselves and grow and get the attention of buyers who are a little worn out with another option for dark chocolate. So once you have that interest, I like to talk about, what the trends are and what companies need to think about as they grow that aren't often thought about. Specifically, as you grow, one of the things that is becoming more and more important in this modern day information age is the price your product is sold for online. I cannot emphasize this enough. The frequency with which the professional buyer is going to do a Google search when vetting your brand is essentially 100% at this point. If there's any good buyer out there not Google searching a brand before they decide to pick it up, they're really not doing their due diligence. And we're seeing that it happens a lot. And so imagine what happens, okay? Your wholesale is $6, say, on a bar of chocolate. This buyer is going to have to pay $6. Okay, well, the minimum they can put that on their shelf for, let's just say, is $10. They do a quick Google search and look at pricing. Oh my gosh, I see it here for $9. I can't do that. Goodbye. Let me find another brand that doesn't have that problem. Why do they do that? Because their customers are going to do that. When someone is out there ready to spend $10 on a chocolate bar, oftentimes they have the information at their fingertips. Within 10 seconds, they can price check that. And no retailer, even the fancy ones, want to be made to look bad by online pricing. So managing your pricing online is something that you absolutely need to have a strategy for as you grow, because your brand can become instantly disqualified if you're still in its emergent phase. You know, in the phase where you've already penetrated grocery deeply, we can have a very different discussion about online pricing. But for brands that are hoping to grow, and part of that is making yourself attractive to specialty retailers, you need to consider what should the minimum for online pricing be, and how can you enforce that. So another thing that we run into all the time with the brands that are succeeding in the marketplace is coming up with a strategy to straddle your growth with the specialty shops. So here's what happens. When you're in your emergent phase and your brand is starting to do well, you're going to get picked up most readily with your specialty, your boutique stores, your gourmet stores. And guess what? Guess who takes the lead from them? The grocery stores, the bigger stores, the big box stores. You know, they don't just wait for their buyers to become interested in something. I know this for a fact because I knew the people that did it for big companies like, you know, Whole Foods or even larger regional grocers. At Whole Foods, it was called a local forager. I don't know if they still have the program, but they have these programs to go out and go to all the cool shops and see what they're excited about. So these, you know, geeky cheese shops, these really cool hip boutique shops, your independent chocolate stores around the country that really know what they're talking about. These are the opinion leaders. This is where the industry trends really emanate from. And this isn't unique to chocolate. This is essentially in any industry. If you want to read a fantastic book about marketing products like this, even from any industry, it's called The Tipping Point. I believe it's Malcolm Gladwell. I can't remember, but it's The Tipping Point. And they have this section on Airwalk shoes and how they rose to glory by making all the specialty retailers, all these like surf shops that were driving the opinions of people in the industry. They made them super, super happy, and how the company and the brand crumbled as soon as they stopped paying attention to those and only started paying attention to the big businesses that were paying them the most money. So what happens is brands will become really popular. All these stores are really excited about it. And then boom, these big opportunities start coming with big stores, grocery stores, and these stores can charge lower pricing. There's really nothing you can do to stop that if you want to be in those stores. So what are you going to do to keep the specialty stores happy? Because if you don't keep the specialty stores happy, you might think, well, I don't need them anymore. I do all this business with these big stores. But guess what? If you're not in the specialty stores, you'll be out of the big stores pretty soon too. And yeah, there's a few exceptions out there, but they're less than 1% of the market in terms of the number of brands that are able to do that. So keeping specialty stores happy, even after your brand is matured and more deeply penetrates the market, is something that you absolutely want to be thinking about. There's lots of different strategies for you to do that. I think companies that do it well. There's lots of them in our catalog. One method of doing that is having, say, creating a line of products, hopefully before it's too late, and the specialty retailers are mad at you and no longer carry your brand. Creating something that is incompatible with the larger grocery stores. That can be based off price point, based off of release times, based off of, say maybe a limited edition that comes and goes pretty quickly. Just take limited editions, for example. Limited editions are a great way to essentially keep the specialty retailers happy because it's by nature only available to them. Now, when I say limited edition, I mean something that is here today and gone tomorrow. You produced 1,000 of them, 2,000 of them, whatever it is. And when it's gone, and you move forward. And a lot of the times for companies that get into grocery stores, they don't think they can afford to spend the bandwidth on things like that. And it's easy to see why. Even 1,000 bars, like, God, we're going to have to come up with packaging, go through this whole thing, R&D, blah, blah, blah. Like that's not worth the investment for us if it's just going to go away. But the beautiful thing is it keeps the specialty stores happy because the grocery stores are never going to be able to pick it up. Anyone who's worked with the big grocery stores know that their buying cycle is really, really long. There's very few of them out there that can say, when you say, hey, we've got this new product, that they can say on the spot, oh, I want it, bring it in, here's a PO, it's there tomorrow. Their buying process can take a year, sometimes longer. So even if they did want it, you never even have to tell them no, because it's just gone before they even get a chance to take advantage of it. Anyway, that's just one small example of things that you can do, but these are things that you need to be thinking of if wholesale is your way that you're wanting to propel your brand. That being said, and kind of the theme that I want to end on is it doesn't have to be that path. And there's a reason that 95% of new food products for the grocery channel fail. Even those that don't fail, it's a long road. There's huge parts of it where there may be no profit and needs lots of investment. And I'm specifically talking about, the types of brands that I see. It seems like they all have the same goal. And what I'm talking about is the path where it seems like everyone wants to become, that brand that is in every grocery store all across America and is a household name and has this like gargantuan penetration. And, they want to be that breakthrough 1% brand. And, my question is, what happened to being a small artisan? That's what attracted me to being that original story I told about a cheesemonger becoming obsessed with craft chocolate. This was, artisans with outlier of quality. They were legends of industry. It was this guy or this lady, making chocolate in some magical way that is different than everyone else. Not, talking about factories and products and brands and all these things that we talk about now. I don't think, I'm so happy to see when I see small artisans like French Prod. I talked to JL yesterday, and they're small portions of their sales, as well as they do with wholesale, are wholesale. The most of their sales is, we've got an ice cream shop, we've got a bonbon shop, we've got a bakery, and really, capitalizing on the loyalty and brand following that you can get inside your own local market. And I'm hoping to see a renaissance in the industry of people going back to like, hey, maybe I'm not going to have a yacht with a helicopter on it because of how rich I'm going to be, but I like being a small artisan and making a decent living and pushing my craft and creating something that is worth, you know, cheese geeks, wine geeks, all these food geeks getting really, really excited about and talking about in a mythic way. And it's hard to get that excited about some of the things and some of the growth trajectories and all these things that everyone has hopes and dreams about. So I think the real true area for growth in this industry, how we are going to get more space on the shelves, is going to be creating shelves of your own, and doing something outside of the existing channel for wholesale. And I know that's really dumb of me to say because that's where I make my money, but I think that we've reached critical mass in the channels that I'm working in. I know the brands that I work with will continue to outperform because not only do we know how to pick them, but we know how to coach them, and we create a really strong team. But even within that channel, it's there's critical mass, and I love seeing in different areas, whether it's you know, French Broad in their neck of the woods, or you know what Chloe Dutra-Roussel and Maria Fernanda de Giacobbe are doing in Venezuela, with causing all these little small producers to create their own following and not need the extensive distribution network. So maybe dumb of me to say that, but there we are, the future of craft chocolate.
Matt, well, what a fantastic presentation and some really interesting insights. And I think particularly in your case, you know, you're not only entwined in the fine chocolate space, but the fact that you also have such an extensive footprint in other specialty foods, and you've seen that trajectory change as well in cheese and other food lines as well. So really appreciate your comments. And we have a number of questions that have come through, and I just thought maybe we could go through a few of those.
Please, yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah, the first one is, and I noticed in the chat there was a question about, you know, does this mean you're suggesting we all focus more on inclusions or creative inclusions, whereas before perhaps there was more of a focus on single origin dark. Any comments on that?
I mean, definitely the growth for us is definitely in more inclusions. Now, am I telling you to do more inclusions? No, I don't want to tell you to do anything. In fact, I think if you're following trends, you're not going to win. If you're not creating the trends, you're not going to be an outlier. So what I would say is find inspiration. The central theme to what I think is being lost and why people are a little bit jaded, the buyers that I'm talking about, is because they're just not as inspired by every single example of a single origin craft chocolate bar as they used to be. So really what I would say to everyone is like, what inspires you? And how can you convey that in your product so that the consumer is going to get it without you standing there telling them about it? So just, I would say find inspiration, because while I mentioned some new trend, by the time you launch a product, that trend may have changed. So just find what inspires you would be my main advice, because that inspires geeks like me too. Great
advice. And there's a couple of questions again about the single origin, and maybe I'll go through those and then we'll turn to some of the other suggestions or comments that you had. One is from Nate Solly as a question. He says, I'm wondering why you hear not another single origin bar, and yet if you look at the wine industry, you probably don't hear just another cab given the vast selection we see on the shelves. Origin plus maker brand versus varietal plus origin plus harvest year plus winery brand. So what are your comments on that?
So I think about that a lot, and I think it's a fantastic question and one that I cannot truly totally answer, but I was talking about that with Yelena the other day. And I think in the wine world, you know, we have there's this really unique thing where, in terms of the mysticism of terroir, with wine, at least, almost not every producer, but a lot of them have unique grapes that no one else has. Literally no one else has them, because they all went to this wine. In chocolate, you don't have that. You have essentially, and I know there's more than this, but you have effectively 30 origins and everyone's using the same thing. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but it is a difference from the wine world to the chocolate world. And that's something that we have to think about. What's the answer to breaking through that? I truly can't even answer, but it is different in the wine world. In the wine world, that bottle that you're holding is the only way you can taste those specific grapes, usually.
Great. So Ed Seguin has a question for you as well. Is the trend you are talking about a move away from recognizing farmers who produce the beans, moving them back towards a commodity-like situation?
Oh gosh, absolutely not. And thank you for the great question, Ed. In fact, we're seeing, there is room for brands that are really breaking through with telling the story of the cacao. And some of those that I mentioned, like some of those that I didn't mention today, like Maru, they're still growing like crazy and telling the story of Vietnamese cacao. Cuna de Piedra that I mentioned, telling the story of cacao. Askinosie telling the story of the farmers. Like it's still just as important as ever. It's just that, the same companies doing it in the same way all the time. There's just so many of them out there trying to do that, and so few origins compared to the sheer amount of chocolate makers that have entered the market. So I think there's always going to be room for brands that are doing the best job at that. And we are currently seeing plenty succeed in the marketplace by doing that. It's just getting harder and harder to do. But if anything, I would say quality cacao from respectable farms that know what they're doing, using good agriculture, is becoming more important, not less important. There's just different ways of marketing products and what types of products are growing the quickest.
Great. And Francis, Matt has a very similar question, and from Puerto Rico. Considering your examples of how to tell a story based on local culture rather than bean origin, do you have any advice for a cacao farming organization on how to illustrate their value?
Again, I would go back to just saying it can come from the cacao. And it does. Like one of our favorite stories to tell. In fact, the chocolate festival that we have coming up, that's a fundraiser for the HCP, the Heirloom Cacao Preservation Group, is about Louisa Abram, and it is about the cacao, and it is about the sense of place, and the sense of place is Brazilian cacao and all these different ingredients. So I think that cacao growing locales, producers, makers that are making in country of origin have a beautiful opportunity to actually use the cacao to tell the sense of place that can be an advantage over those that are producing in other areas that have nothing to do with the cacao. So I would say find a way to tell the story using the cacao if you're producing in a country like Puerto Rico that I do know has some cacao, but it's got to be, it doesn't have to be, but it helps if there's more than that.
Mm-hmm. And again, we're getting a lot of similar type of questions. Where does made at origin stand in all of this, as far as chocolate production, which is similar to what you just mentioned?
Super important. Made at origin. I think there's fantastic opportunities there. And we have many brands made at origin that are outperforming, the market, and some of those that I've mentioned today that are doing a fantastic job. And another great example is look at Fossa in Singapore. And maybe it's dumb to think that like they have like 10 to 12 single origin bars, and the ones that do the best for us are the ones that sound Asian to Americans, the Malaysian origin, the Philippines. And yeah, it's not in Singapore, but it's more about like the brand, and it seems more appropriate to them, to our consumers. So
great. And Gene Thompson has an excellent question too, and this relates to both the business survey that we'll be talking about tomorrow, and then also the consumer survey that was done that we'll be discussing next week. And she asks, how can you increase the number of consumers who understand the benefits of fine craft chocolate and will spend $10 plus for a bar, that's what's going to get the category more shelf space.
Absolutely. And I know firsthand why that's important and how to do it. I've, spent many years at the cheese counter. We had what's called a chocolate file, where we would at our store, if someone would go into the chocolate aisle, and we would approach them and say, hey, would you like to try some of these ballers? Do you have any questions? Here's a sample of our chocolate of the week. And I think the way that we need to drive sales is provide more opportunities to engage consumers that have been sadly lacking during the pandemic. It's about getting product in people's mouths and connecting people with people. There's nothing like giving someone a sample from someone that's friendly, excited, and knows what they're talking about, and has like a passionate sort of infectious, passionate thing to say. And unfortunately, whereas cheese, there's ample room for that. Any cheese shop you go in, you're going to get cheese samples, and you can talk to a cheesemonger that knows what they're talking about. The way that we grew the market is by doing that with chocolate. If we can't do that with chocolate, it's going to be hard to grow the market because there's already enough choices. So now how do we engage with consumers that may not be interested in a $10 chocolate bar? The way to do that is in engaging them one-on-one with someone that's passionate and knows what they're talking about. So our industry needs more of that, in my opinion.
Yeah, and perhaps a great way of doing that is through some of these wonderful chocolate festivals that we haven't been able to participate in because of the COVID pandemic. Have you seen any downside or downtick because of that, of the lack of that one-on-one connection with consumers? Or do you think that because of online sales capacity, smaller chocolate companies have been able to still prevail?
So our sales grew triple digits, and not every brand in our catalog performed like that, but the average was fantastic growth. So I think what we saw during the pandemic was, yes, we lost the ability to do what I was talking about to grow the market. But what was beautiful, I think about it, was that the sad thing about not being able to spend money on experiences, travel, restaurants, people didn't stop treating themselves, and they started treating themselves to craft chocolate, and our sales went through the roof, both at our stores, online, and the brands that we sell. Like, wow, it was transformational. And some of them are, 2, 3, 4 times size the companies that they were pre-pandemic. And as horrible as that is to say that, good could come from this, some did. And a lot of these companies benefited from people being at home, treating themselves to nice things.
Wonderful. And that actually is very consistent with what these surveys have shown as well. So we'll be sharing that advice as well. So I'm glad to hear that that's consistent with what you're seeing as well, Matt. Yep. Another question coming in, are there some new trends on what percentage producers should offer their product at wholesale to help control outside sales in markets and online?
Not sure if I like percentage of the cacao.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question either. Are there some new trends on what percentages producers should offer their product at wholesale to help control outside sales in markets and online?
I mean, I think I understand the gist of the question, but basically, there's range of margins that are acceptable. It depends on what type of store you're trying to attract. So let's just say that if you're focused on growing the specialty market first, you need to be offering the wholesale customer, the store, you need to be offering them 40 to 50% margin. If you're not, it won't be attractive to them.
Mm-hmm. And just that's very helpful, because I'm just seeing a clarification. It was on the product margin. So you just responded to that. Perfect. Yep. Great. Here's another question coming in from Leslie Coulter. We believe to have discovered a truly new single origin in Ecuador, and we have set up a farmers cooperative in this location. Currently, we are concentrating on heirloom preservation and marketing the fermented and dried beans. Fantastic. Of course, everyone knows about Ecuadorian Nacional cacao. So how do we highlight this product in the market that is already so full? So how to differentiate something in in a market like Ecuador where everyone knows Nacional?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first of all, yes, everyone does know Nacional, but from my perspective as a geek and a buyer, from what I've gleaned, they're not all created equal, and sometimes what the claims don't match the reality. So I think that I'm really hoping that we can see farms and or cooperatives, and we're starting to see this, but I want to see more of it, where the farm is what becomes the brand, the famous thing that can command many multiples of the price point. I think that there is a huge opportunity there for farms, cooperatives, or haciendas that can brand themselves, that have a unique claim to quality. I would say if you have a unique claim to like pure genetics or quality, go to the HCP, the Heirloom Cacao Preservation Fund, get it certified. I'm always looking for those sorts of these beautiful stories that I can tell about a cacao. I still tell those all the time, and they still resonate. It's just a lot of times they don't live up to it. So if you have something that lives up to those mythic stories and you can create a brand around that, it doesn't have to be chocolate. I think that what I really want to see is farms create those brands, so that when a chocolate maker says, I'm going to do a limited edition and I just got a special limited batch from Tranquilidad, that consumers eventually will be like, oh my God, so-and-so has a Tranquilidad, I have to try that. I know it's hard to do, that branding is difficult in and of itself, and that it doesn't necessarily has a different skill set than good agriculture. But I really hope to see that. And I think the HCP program that's through the FCIA or an affiliate with the FCIA is a great way to start down that road.
Great. And I see we put the web link in the chat. So everyone who's interested to learn more about that, it's a fantastic organization doing some really important work
super meaningful to this chocolate geek. Yeah. You get my attention if you use certified HCP in your single origin craft chocolate bar. Yeah.
And this isn't a question that came through in the Q&A, but one that I have for you, Matt, too, to close on is, I think in the early days, certification was so vitally important. Fair trade, Rainforest Alliance, UTZ, et cetera. What do you see in the marketplace as far as the importance on certification or direct trade or other types of arrangements like that between farming communities and the public?
I think all the feelings that go behind those things are more important than ever. I mean, just look at what's happening in Glasgow last week, and the news is talking about it. I think a great example of how important it is to people is, after all of this stuff being talked about last week, the price of green stocks are going up dramatically, whereas the price of traditionally fossil fuel intensive stocks are actually going down, maybe not dramatically, but things being in the news like that, it's on people's minds. They care. The problem is a lot of the times they're dubious of these actual certifications, and some of them, like fair trade, may not be that meaningful for someone that truly wants to make a difference. But they realize that some of these certifications don't always not only fall short, but they can have the reverse effect, or they don't have the intended effect. So I think people are confused. So if you have a brand that can make people feel good about the way you're sourcing your cacao, about the way that you're doing it with a less intense carbon footprint in your supply chain, that is very meaningful to people. It's just really hard to do through certifications alone.
Wonderful. Well, Matt, thank you for answering the questions that we had for you today, and for that great presentation you gave, for your insights. And any other closing words or advice you would give to the attendees?
Yeah, again, go for inspiration. Don't listen to me. By the time a trend is identified, it's probably on its way out. So, and I'm just one dumb guy that continuously gets lucky because of the smart people that I'm surrounded by. Bill, you know, the real brains of this operation is Yelena. She's just too busy to talk to y'all, but it's really a pleasure for me to be here. And I thank you all for, it's an honor.
Well, I think Matt, you are an incredible guy, both you and Yelena, and we're just so thankful to have you as members and for the time you spent to share your insights. So we really appreciate it. And I hope everyone can join us tomorrow as well, because I think that's going to be interesting, as well as next week, to take all of this information that we're hearing from the membership, from the surveys that have been done, to help companies really think about how they strategize for 2022 and beyond. So with that, again, Matt, thank you for your time today, and look forward to seeing everyone tomorrow.
My pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.